All right, so you might have noticed that in the past couple sections, we've known the y-intercept. And so then it just fits the y equals mx plus b. You find the slope, you got the y-intercept, and you just plug it in. In this situation, we're going to be looking when the y-intercept is not given. So you'll notice in this example, to start, the slope is -2, but that point right there is 5, 3, not a y-intercept. Remember, the y-intercept is always going to be a 0 something, okay? So in this case, 5, 3 is not a y-intercept. So we could kind of think of this, maybe put it into some context like we've seen in some of the examples. Imagine that the x is the days and the y is your dollars. So the 0.53 would be like saying on day 5, I had $3, okay? And then in terms of the gaining or losing money, well, that would be coming from the slope, right? The slope is -2. So you think of that as losing $2 per day, right? Because the slope is -2, so losing money. So in this case here, the slope, right, is -2, but what we need to do is find that y-intercept. So the y-intercept, remember, if that's like a 0, b, some number, that would be like day 0 would be how many dollars? So how many dollars did I start with? So if I was losing $2 a day, and we know that on day 5, I had $3, we can just kind of run that like back in reverse, right? We went from over those 5 days, from day 0 to day 5, we know we were losing $2 per day for 5 days. So kind of like how much money did we lose over that time? So if it was -2 per day for 5 days, that would be -2 times 5, right? -10. So that would be a change of $10, right? It decreased by $10. So in other words, I know I went down $10 to have the 3. So you were spending money. We're working this in reverse. So we're thinking like, well, then that means if I was losing money, if I go back previous days, that means I had more money the day before, right? So for instance, if day 5 was $3, let's run that back. Day 4. Well, day 4, I would have had $2 more because that means I didn't spend that. So that would be running that in reverse. That means I would have had $5, right? Because if I went from $5, I spend 2, I get 3. So if I run that in reverse, I'm just kind of going backwards here. Okay? And so we do that again, and we do it again, and we do it again. In other words, we're running this in reverse, that undoing that $10. Okay? So that would be like the $3 plus that 10 that I had spent, because I'm working back in time. So if I went, added 2 more, added 2 more, added 2 more, let's see, that's how many days? 2, 4, 6, 8, 1 more, 10, right? That would be 10 more dollars. That means I would have had $13 on day 0. Okay? Now, I could figure that out. Instead of counting it one by one, I could have just found that total change of the $10 that I undo and kind of take that 3 and add the $10 back. Or that would have been coming from adding the 2 times the 5, because I'm running that in reverse. Now, visually, if that's a little bit confusing on the math, let's go to the next slide here, because visually we can kind of map that out now. So remember on day 5, so that's day 5, we had $3. That's that point. All right? We know that each day we're going down $2, so -2 over 1. Or in other words, You remember that graph where it's like, oh, down and to the right? Or I could think of that as going up and to the left if I'm running that in reverse. So that would have been +2 -1, right? Because I'm going back in my days. And then 2 more the day before, 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 and we actually do see that 013 right there. So we can kind of just trace our time backwards here. All right. So putting this all together, remember the slope was -2, and we just found through tracing our step backs that the y-intercept was 013. So that would give us, well, look at this equation. There's the x on the second term, so -2x, and then a 13, or in the other form, y equals -2x plus 13. Could find it that way. Now, I want to show you a little trick, though, that is actually encompassing all those steps that we just kind of reasoned out by thinking of our days and money. We could actually even do this algebraically just by saying, okay, y equals -2x plus b. Remember, the slope was given. We were trying to find b, the y-intercept. Well, if we plug in the point 5, 3, then 3 goes in place of the y, -2 times 5, because that's the x, plus b. Look at that calculation right there. -2 times 5. Remember, we had -10. That was the change that it lost in those 5 days. But remember, why did we add 10? Well, look, when I solve this equation, this would be 3 equals -10 plus b, but to solve that, I have to undo it. That's just like going backwards in time, and I get 13 equals b. So the context kind of shows how you could figure this out again by really just tracing it out on the steps. You know, imagine it on the graph. Work your steps up backwards. Or algebraically, I can plug in the x and the y and then solve for b to get -2x plus 13. Okay, let's try one more like that. That's a little bit of a learning curve on this. The next one's a little trickier, but this graph visual is a great way to think of it. You're just picking a point, figuring out which way you're going, and then you just work that way back on the graph. And algebraically, you can just plug in the x and the y and then solve for your b. Applies like some of the same principles. Notice this time, I don't even have the slope. I just have 2 points. So I've got point 1 and point 2. But if I have 2 points, then I can find the slope, right? So on day 7, you had $3, and then later on day 12, you had $9. So in this case, you went up by how many dollars? Well, you went up $6 over 5 days, right? Your dollars to days for your slope would have been up 6 over 5. So that would be the slope of that line between those 2 points, 6 over 5. In terms of the context, I kind of said it, right? What does that mean? Well, you went up $6 over 5 days. The fraction itself even kind of illustrates that. Up 6 over 5. So you went up by $6 over a period of 5 days. All right, so in 5 days, the money went up by $6, right? So that means you're earning, what would that be per day then? 6 over 5. Well, I think I can do money makes sense kind of as a decimal. So we could think of this as up $6 over 5 days, or if I just divide 6 over 5, you get 1.2 or $1.20 per day. That makes sense for the decimal. So the slope would either be 6/5 or 1.2. You could kind of use either one of those in this case. All right, so what does the y-intercept mean? Well, again, the y-intercept would be 0 something. So that would be how much money you have, or I should say had, on day 0. Okay, so you had been making $1.20 per day. Well, how much did you have to start? Well, we could pick either one of those points. Day 7, you had $3, and that means you went, let's see, up $1.20 over 7 days, $1.20 per day over 7 days, right? 0 to 7. So that would be a total change of, remember, we can just multiply that, 1.2 times 7. And that's a total change of 8.4 or 840. But remember, we're going back in time, right? We had been increasing, right? Increasing up to, let's see, day 0, or excuse me, day 1, 2, 3, right? So if I'm tracing back, I want to see where I was going, so I would take away the 8.4. So you would have had less money on day 0. Well, how much money? Well, it would be 3 minus 8.4, which would be a negative 3 minus 8.4, giving us negative 5.4. All right, and then so that would be day 0, you had negative 5.4. All right, so for your slope and your y-intercept, that would be your y-intercept. The slope was the negative, was the 6/5 or the $1.20. So that would be negative 5.4 plus 1.2x. All right, and let's work through that algebraically again. This context is kind of helpful to kind of think about like why this works. Algebraically, it works out pretty nice though. Remember, you found the slope was 6/5. So if I plug in y equals 6/5 x plus b and try to find the b, I would pick a day. Pick a day. Day 7 had $3, so 3 equals 6/5 times 7 plus b. And again, this isn't really going to work out. We already saw that it's going to give a decimal. But just as a reminder, to do the fraction, it would be 6 times 7 over 5 plus b, which I think we've seen that number, right? 42 divided by 5. That was our 8.4. And then you take away 8.4, just like we thought when we were working backwards. And so we get negative 5.4 equals b. And then finally put it all together, y equals 1.2x minus 5.4. So algebraically, I could kind of show you the steps, but it's kind of like, why does that work? Well, these two examples hopefully help you see like why it works. I do think, I'm just going to go back real quick.